Have you always been drawn to the idea of being cute but creepy? The idea of wearing soft feminine details while still having a dark aesthetic. You may be drawn to the dark aesthetic muse, the haunted doll. My name is Melissa, and this is part of a series talking about the different dark aesthetic muses. If you are aiming for a darker style and you are at a loss for inspiration, I have a theory that if you aim to dress like one of these 5 muses, vampire, witch, siren, haunted doll, or dark fairy, you will achieve a darker aesthetic effortlessly. Do I look like I'm wearing a nightgown from the 1800s? Because that was intentional, or my hope at least. Just a disclaimer before I dive into the different inspirations, different shops that I recommend you looking into if the haunted doll aesthetic is for you. Please keep in mind that any of these dark aesthetic muses are meant to be inspirations. These are not hard faceted rules or aesthetics that you have to fit a certain box into. When it comes to self-expression in style, sometimes it can be frustrating when what you envision up here does not translate into your style. I have already done a breakdown of the dark muses, vampire, witch, and siren, and if you want to take a fun little quiz to see which dark aesthetic muse you are probably naturally drawn to, there is a quiz at the beginning of the vampire video. But really quickly, I can go over right now what is the key differences and key traits of the 5 dark muses. Also, please keep in mind you don't have to just be one. This is just, again, meant to be a collection of inspirations. The vampire muse is going to be the most maximalist of the 5 muses. Think of an old vampire that has collected treasures and riches over time. The witch as a muse, or the idea of being witchy, is going to be nature occult. So think of how a lot of a witch's or wizard's power is drawn from nature. The siren is going to be the most sleek, maybe minimal, and very subtly sultry. And the fabrications are going to be silk satins or anything with a high sheen to mimic the ocean. Haunted doll is going to be soft, feminine, maybe even the most modest out of the 5 muses. There's a lot of poofs and ruffles. And the dark fairy, this is probably the closest I would envision to any colorful alternative styles and a little bit of everything. But let's do a deep dive specifically into the haunted doll, because today's video, after all, is a love letter to this unconventional dark aesthetic. Whenever it comes to darker styles, I would actually say vampire and witch are probably the most obvious of the styles. Most styles such as trad goth or very obvious alternative aesthetics are very vampire or witch based, which is nothing wrong with that. That is actually my personal style. When it comes to the haunted doll, you are balancing things that aren't actually traditionally dark associated, but you turn it up a level. You add this unsettling feeling, and I think having this juxtaposition of normally what shouldn't be is what makes it fun. For example, the Balletcore aesthetic probably did not have us in mind when it was being thought of in the realm of the internet. But when it comes to darkening it, it starts to feel like a bit haunted doll. It has the ruffles of the tutu, this light elegance that is often associated with ballet culture. But when you add elements that feel kind of black swan, maybe a little unsettling darker themes within the ballet, and it becomes dark balletcore, that is an element of the haunted doll, if that makes sense. The haunted doll style actually fits into already so many pre-existing styles. And the idea of a haunted doll as a muse is, again, I emphasize a muse. I did not mean for this series to be another core or another aesthetic, but more so a muse, so that you are not constantly looking at inspiration to a person, a celebrity, or an influencer. Okay, let's describe the haunted doll on its own. So the haunted doll is cute but unsettling. And whenever I talk about dark aesthetics, unsettling is kind of a good term, especially if you are into darker themes or horror films. It is a very alluring look. The haunted doll, out of all the muses, is probably going to have the most light and muted color palette. It is dark coquette. It is dark balletcore. It could also be Kuro Lolita or any Lolita styles that have a darker take on it. It is Baroque styles. It is Rococo. Rococo is often very frilly, very dramatic, but in a fun and soft feminine way. It is frilly details, ruffles, poofy sleeves, fun collars, and a play with proportions. And also when it comes to the haunted doll, a lot of my inspirations are going to be a lot of movies or runway, and some of these items are not practical for, let's say, the office or running errands. So here are some examples of some people that I actually really love their style that emulate the dark haunted doll Muse in their own way. Meg Murayama, she has a great style, and because of her red hair, she kind of gives off a vampiric doll. She often has different layers, a lot of short layers, but this specific style that she's wearing kind of gives me a vampiric doll aesthetic that's actually very wearable on a daily basis. My friend AJ of AJ the Cinephile, you may know her for her horror movie recreations and movie posters. Her style on a daily basis mimics a very haunted doll mixed with the colorful saturated palette of a fairy. She also has a very 80s palette to her. She wears plaid skirts and poofy sleeves. My friend Dreamy Creeps, I call her casual clowncore. She approves it. And what I love is that she has these very practical garments that look so good on her, such as the cardigan and miniskirt, but she plays it up with clown-like makeup with her iconic eyeliner as well as these fun collars. Pandora of Panbach. A lot of her style is a mix of what I would consider Siren, but also a bit of haunted doll, such as what she shows here. And my friend of Ghoul Host, Kaeli, often does have a doll-like aesthetic with the frills, poofy sleeves, and some of these lace trim garments. My friend Kaeli also has a brand called Odd Yarn. Odd Yarn oftentimes has handmade crochet items that are very clown inspired or very eccentric and quirky, and I feel like a lot of the things that Kaeli makes fits into the haunted doll aesthetic. Okay, so like I mentioned, whenever it comes to looking to these fantastical muses such as the haunted doll, you don't have to just pick one, and you don't even have to be one or two all the time. You can switch it up. And so let's say you want to give off a vampire doll aesthetic. What does that look like? I have mentioned before that my friend Rosie of Rosie Beam, or Rosie Blair, she often does give off a haunted doll aesthetic, sometimes a witch aesthetic, but this specific Selkie dress in red and her against this forestry background is kind of like this great mood imagery for what a vampire doll can look like. Another example of a vampire doll is how some 90s runway looks. There's a lot of velvet pieces that are still very naively inspired and feels very vampiric doll-like. The frills and lace trims that are actually a natural crossover of the vampire doll is so natural, so sometimes when you're dressing for a haunted doll, you may accidentally be giving a vampiric style as well. However, whenever you add doll into the vampire aesthetic, it is going to be a lot softer than pure vampire because there's going to be playful details. Pops of blood red is what's going to make it feel more vampire than pure doll. And vampiric corsetry mixed with big ribbons could also be a fun way to give off both of these styles. What does the haunted doll mixed with a witch muse look like? So unlike witch on its own, which is very earthy tones, very flowy and free, kind of like you picture what you would probably dress like during a ritual in the forest on a full moon night. The witch doll feels more organic than pure doll on its own. Haunted doll can often look like they're wearing synthetic doll-like dresses, but to make it feel a bit more witchy, it's going to have very evident natural fibers. There's also going to be more flow, maybe undyed fabrics, and also signs of the occult, whether it's a bunch of trinkets, ritualistic jewelry. Think of the movie The Witch, how the way Anya Taylor-Joy dresses and that overall style. Maybe think of how they were dressed during the Salem witch trials or any period drama dress. The Siren doll, I was actually asked, is this where pirate aesthetic would fit into? And I would say yes, probably. Most of the time, whenever it comes to styles or the pirate tops that are often associated in pirate movies, often actually have a doll aesthetic, but you have some of these oceanic influences, maybe seashell jewelry, maybe evidence that they have been on a voyage through the ocean for many years. The drowned doll aesthetic may have pops of blues, purples, or even like seaweed dark greens. Think of sleek, long layers that make it a bit more Siren than just pure doll. Sheer elements that almost mimic the translucency of the ocean, pirate blouses, and shiny textures. I also think of hairstyles that feel a bit more free, like they were influenced by the salt water, so they have some of these curls or maybe just like flowing mermaid-like hair. And again, the shiny textures can actually start to feel a bit more Siren than doll, so definitely balance it out with other doll-like details if you want a balance of the two. So when mixing dark fairy with the haunted doll Muse, there are actually so many ways to go about this. Think of this as just one avenue, and you can branch this off into whatever speaks to you the most. One of their greatest crossovers is that they have these unconventional colors that actually can read as a dark aesthetic or alternative. So one iteration of the fairy doll that is colorful and playful is like a fairy tale character. Think of this plaid, poofy, silky dress that's a bit off the shoulder. It is playful, it is whimsical, it is fairy and haunted doll. I also think of the silhouettes of Poor Things, and I know that was a very controversial movie, but from a fashion historian standpoint, the style was very beautiful, and you can still take inspiration from it, or at least the time period that this movie was inspired by. Again, fun colors is what's going to make it feel a bit doll-like, but when you add the pops of color that is a bit more saturated than the muted pastels of doll, that's when you start to feel like it's this mix. Medieval styles actually had a lot more colors than most people expect, so the idea of adding a dark medieval with colorful aspects can actually start to feel very fairy doll-like. And again, striking patterns can also be a great way to just make your doll aesthetic or style feel a bit more fairy-like. In terms of getting inspiration for makeup, again, there were so many avenues that it was hard to really narrow it down. I think the obvious, like I mentioned with the casual haunted doll looks, going for more a clown-like makeup, like what my friend Josie of Dreamy Creeps does, where she has the eyeliner mimicking the triangles that we often see in clown makeup. There are other ways to go about that as well. Ghoul in Japan, I'm gonna put her right here. Almost all of her looks give off the haunted doll aesthetic, haunted doll muse. I think she is the haunted doll muse. So think of graphic doll eyeliner, whether it is kind of clown-like or something that feels a bit more animated. Maybe doll eye mascara where it literally looks like a doll's eyes popping at you. I think evident blush could also feel very haunted doll. The 1920s ethereal looks, I feel like a lot of 1920s looks in general have that doll-like feeling. And when paired with certain darker styles, it can definitely feel like a haunted doll aesthetic. Pink glossy blushes definitely mimic the look of that porcelain doll look. And again, Ghoul in Japan is a great inspiration. Like I mentioned before, it's all about the little details. So sometimes it's just the little things that you incorporate into your wardrobe that really add up, and sometimes these little details can give off the haunted doll look. Some of these details are short poofy silhouettes, ruffles, lace trims, fun embroidered collars, maybe collars that are exaggerated Peter Pan collars, jester-like collars, or any clown-like details, ribbons, and maybe painterly type of jewelry. When it comes to shopping for the haunted doll muse, I feel like this is probably one of the easier styles to thrift. I mean, in hindsight, any dark muse is easy to style. But when it comes to the haunted doll, it's these playful elements and probably colorful things that you may find at the thrift store or vintage store, especially if it's a curated vintage store that tends to have these period-like pieces that have maybe collars like this in the materials, or like an 80s type of floral look. However, if you feel like as though you are having a hard time finding haunted doll pieces in a thrift store or a curated secondhand shop, here are some stores that I recommend looking for pieces. So I've mentioned them time and time again, but La Femme Noire just never fails, and their new Nosferatu collection is one of the most perfect styles for the haunted doll aesthetic. You have the dress that Ellen wears in Nosferatu, but also other pieces that La Femme Noire has featured even prior to the Nosferatu feature. They overall have amazing pieces. They are a bit on the pricier side, but I feel like whenever you want a wardrobe that will last you years, sometimes paying that higher ticket price will be worth it. Any pieces that I have bought from Micheline Pitt, such as Vixen, I have one dress from La Femme Noire, they have held up, and I feel like the price is justifiable. However, you can also find some of her stuff on eBay or on secondhand. Wax Poetic Clothing also has some great styles and silhouettes that fit into the haunted doll look. They also have some great dresses in a variety of colors and patterns, and I feel like they are also of great quality from what I've heard. I personally have not bought from them yet, but from what I've heard, I've only heard great things. And of course, I can't talk about the haunted doll aesthetic without mentioning Blackwood Castle. I feel like it is such a great small business to support, but also they just have the most amazing silhouettes and qualities, but definitely the textures and silhouettes that you see in the store would fit great into a haunted doll wardrobe. In terms of accessories and heirloom pieces that would fit perfectly on a Victorian looking doll, Petals and Poison, you can never go wrong with some of their encased lockets or very gothic Victorian-esque pieces. If you like the visuals and collages that I include in my videos, I always compile them into a fun little PDF or a little ebook, and I have them available to my Patreon members, dollar tiers and up, and sometimes I upload them prior to my videos so you have an idea of what I will be discussing when or before the video. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you have a great week, and if you celebrate the holidays, I hope you have a wonderful Christmas. I hope you have a wonderful Yule. I hope you have a Happy New Year if I don't see you till then. And until next time, bye.